The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that feels heavy rather than calm. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor as lawyers shuffled papers and spectators whispered among themselves. At the center of it all stood an old woman, small, frail, and dressed in a faded gray coat that looked decades old. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a worn handbag, the leather cracked from years of use. No one seemed to take her seriously. She looked out of place in a courtroom filled with sharp suits, polished shoes, and confident voices. To most people present, she appeared to be just another confused elderly woman who had wandered into the wrong building. Even the judge, a man known for his sharp tongue and quicker wit, leaned back in his chair with a faint smirk. As formalities ended, the judge glanced down at the file and cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he said casually, "we need your call sign for the record." His tone was light, almost playful, as if he were humoring a child rather than addressing a witness. The old woman hesitated, her eyes lifted slowly, scanning the courtroom, faces filled with boredom, curiosity, and quiet judgment. She took a breath, steady but deep, as though preparing herself for something more than just a simple answer. The judge raised an eyebrow, amused by the pause. A few people in the gallery chuckled softly. To them, this was entertainment, a brief break from routine cases and legal arguments. "Well," the judge asked again, this time with a hint of sarcasm. "Don't be shy, what's your call sign?" The old woman's lips parted, but for a moment, no sound came out. The courtroom leaned in slightly, still unaware that this seemingly harmless question was about to open a door no one expected, one that would turn mockery into shock and laughter into silence. A low ripple of laughter passed through the courtroom, soft at first, then growing bolder. Someone near the back shook their head, another leaned over to whisper a comment that ended with a smirk. To them, the scene was almost comical, an elderly woman struggling to answer a simple question, a judge clearly enjoying the moment. The judge tapped his pen against the bench, the sound sharp and impatient. "Ma'am," he said, smiling thinly, "this isn't a trick question. We just need the call sign you used. Surely you remember that much." More laughter followed, careless and dismissive. The old woman stood still, her posture straight despite her age. Her eyes, though clouded by years, held a strange calm, one that didn't match the ridicule filling the room. She adjusted her grip on the handbag, knuckles whitening, as if grounding herself in the present. A young lawyer whispered, "She probably doesn't even know what a call sign is." Another snorted quietly. Even the court clerk avoided eye contact, embarrassed by the unfolding spectacle. The judge leaned forward now, clearly amused. "Let me guess," he said lightly, "was it something dramatic? Something heroic?" He paused for effect. "Or should I just write, 'unknown,' and move on?" That did it. A few people laughed openly this time. For them, it was harmless fun, authority teasing weakness, power reminding frailty of its place. No one objected, no one intervened, but the old woman did not react the way they expected. She didn't shrink, she didn't apologize. Instead, she slowly raised her head, her gaze steadying on the judge's face. The faint tremor in her hands stopped. Her breathing became measured, controlled, almost trained. The laughter began to fade, not because anyone felt guilty, but because something in her expression felt different. Unfamiliar, uncomfortable. The judge noticed it too, though he brushed it off. "All right, let's hear it," he said, still smiling. "What was your call sign?" For a brief moment, the courtroom hovered between mockery and something else entirely, unaware that the joke was already ending, and that the next word spoken would change the tone of the room forever. The old woman's lips moved at last, but no sound followed. Not yet. She seemed to weigh the moment, as if deciding whether the room deserved the truth it was about to hear. Her eyes never left the judge, and for the first time since the proceedings began, he felt the faintest stir of unease. "Speak up, ma'am," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier humor. She leaned slightly toward the microphone. The movement was small, careful, deliberate. The courtroom held its breath, not out of respect, but curiosity, like an audience waiting for a punchline. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 2 words, soft, calm, unadorned. They didn't sound dramatic. They weren't loud. They weren't spoken with anger or pride. Yet the effect was immediate and unsettling, like a sudden drop in temperature. The judge's smile froze. The pen slipped from his fingers and struck the bench with a sharp click that echoed far louder than her voice had. Somewhere in the gallery, a laugh died halfway out of someone's mouth. Another person shifted uncomfortably in their seat, unsure why their chest suddenly felt tight. The court clerk looked up, eyes widening. Fingers paused over the keyboard. The old woman straightened, no longer frail, no longer uncertain. The years seemed to fall away from her posture, replaced by something disciplined, something earned. She did not repeat the words. She didn't need to. "Excuse me," the judge said quietly. For the first time, he wasn't mocking her. He was confirming what he thought he'd heard, and hoping he was wrong. The silence stretched, thick, heavy, unforgiving. A man in the front row swallowed hard. A woman near the aisle clasped her hands together without realizing it. No one laughed now, no one whispered. Those two words hung in the air, invisible but undeniable, carrying weight that could not be explained, only recognized. The judge cleared his throat, suddenly aware that the courtroom no longer felt like it belonged to him. "Ma'am," he said again, slower this time, "could you repeat that?" The old woman met his gaze and gave the slightest nod. The joke was over, and everyone in the room knew he repeated the words, this time clearly. Red River. They landed like a verdict no one had prepared for. The judge's face drained of color so quickly it was impossible to miss. His confident posture stiffened, shoulders pulling back as if struck by an invisible force. He stared at the old woman, no longer seeing a frail witness, but something else, someone else. His eyes flicked down to the file, then back to her, searching for reassurance that this was coincidence. It wasn't. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, not laughter now, but confusion edged with fear. A senior attorney in the front row straightened abruptly, his jaw tightening. He leaned toward his colleague and whispered a single question, urgent and low. The colleague didn't answer, because he already knew. The court clerk's hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. "Your Honor," she began, then stopped, unsure whether it was appropriate to speak at all. The judge raised a hand to silence her, though his fingers shook as he did. The authority in the gesture felt forced, borrowed. "The courtroom will remain silent," he said, but the command rang hollow. Everyone was already silent. "Red River," he repeated under his breath, as if testing whether the words might lose their meaning if spoken again. They didn't. If anything, they grew heavier. He leaned forward slowly. "Ma'am," he said, choosing each word with care, "that call sign, where did you use it?" The old woman did not answer immediately. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small, weathered object, metallic, scratched, unmistakably official. She placed it gently on the stand. Gasps followed, not loud, but sharp. Recognizing. The judge swallowed hard. His earlier smile felt like a distant memory, almost someone else's mistake. He looked around the courtroom and realized something terrifying. He was no longer in control of the room. Red River wasn't just a name. It was a history, a buried operation, a secret many believed had died decades ago. And the woman standing before him was living proof that it hadn't. The judge stared at the object on the stand, his mind racing faster than his training allowed him to admit. Protocols long forgotten clawed their way back into memory, classified briefings, warnings whispered behind closed doors, instructions that ended with never asked questions. He finally understood his mistake. This was never a joke. "Court is adjourned," he said abruptly, his voice firm but strained. The words echoed through the room, shocking everyone present. All parties will remain seated. No one moved. Two men in plain clothes, who moments earlier had blended into the gallery, stood at the same time. Their movements were precise, coordinated, military. One approached the bench and quietly displayed identification the judge didn't question. He nodded once, respectfully, as if acknowledging a superior rather than interrupting a civilian trial. The old woman remained standing, calm, composed. Years of silence had not weakened her, they had sharpened her. When one of the men addressed her, his tone was careful. "Ma'am, we'll take it from here." She inclined her head slightly. Not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The courtroom buzzed with unspoken questions. Reporters leaned forward, pens frozen. Lawyers exchanged glances, realizing this case would never appear in public records. Some stories were never meant to be told. As the old woman was escorted toward the exit, she paused and looked back at the judge. Her gaze held no anger, no triumph, only certainty. "You asked for my call sign," she said quietly. "Now you remember why it matters." Then she turned and walked away, her steps slow but steady, leaving behind a courtroom forever changed, and a judge who would never again mistake silence for weakness.